Assalamu alaikum and welcome to live. It's gonna be a quick one, hopefully today, inshallah. But I wanted to touch upon something which is a huge topic, but something that's extremely relevant to us as human beings, and especially during this COVID-19 outbreak, this coronavirus outbreak, and that is to do with suffering, but in particular the meaning behind suffering. Now, I've done other videos on this before, but I wanted to do this one because I recently went through a book, uh, a very interesting book by a philosopher named Albert Camus, uh, who I've spoken about many times before on this channel as well. And he was a philosopher who really focused in on the he was an existentialist philosopher who really took a deeper look at the question of meaning and what life means. And one of his ideas, which really, I think, makes him stand out, is this whole idea of the absurd. What he referred to as the absurd was this perspective that life has no meaning, yet as human beings we cannot help but seek out. We cannot help but seek out. Apologies. We cannot help but seek out meaning. So he talks about the absurd, but one particular book, the book that obviously I went through last week that I want to share with you guys today and some thoughts on in a review, type of a review, but more specifically to touch upon the sort of core theme of that book, which is to do with find meaning and suffering, basically. It's called The Plague. Now, it's a very interesting book, especially considering and taking into account the times that we're going through right now with COVID-19. And it's eerily, it's almost as if he saw this outbreak. The way he covers it, the way he speaks about it. And let me give you a context. Basically, the book is about a town, a city, where it's this sort of role model type of, ideal type of, or modern city, modern, the type of city where you have people who are fully focused, and no different from the type of world that we're living in today, a type of world, a type of place where people are focused on the worldly life, the material. They're so focused on their jobs, their occupations, their businesses, that they've almost forgotten about the fact that they are alive, right? They're living, they're human. They just are continuously being occupied by their daily lives. So much so that even he alludes to this in the book. It's almost like it's their habits that keep them going, not meaning, right? It's that daily habit, the from waking to sleeping. It's about the way they're sort of ingrained and entrenched in this material, physical world, and how their life is all about just living out those hours, those hours they're awake and they're going about their daily lives, right? They don't think about anything else. It's that sort of, if you like, the perfect, how can I say this? Not caricature, but the perfect almost archetype of the type of world that we're a part of today, which is where people are continuously and solely fixated on the material. It's all about, worldly goals, worldly ambitions, making money, climbing up the ladder, buying that new house, having that, going on that holiday, enjoying yourself with this, that, and the other. It's this type of hedonistic type of perspective. And this town, this city is then disrupted, right? It's disrupted by a plague, which first starts killing, the rats start dying and they start noticing this, and then eventually people start dying, and before you know it, it's an outbreak, right? It's a pandemic. It just takes over. And what's really interesting is that the way he describes the stages of this pandemic is very similar to the way it sort of took place or has been taking place during this COVID outbreak. Initially there's this hysteria, there is this reaction which is just extremely selfish, where people are only worried about themselves, concerned about themselves. They're hoarding stuff. There's this strange, aggressive, selfish reaction that takes place initially, and then people calm down, and then eventually it gets to the stage in the book where people are they're just ignoring it. They're not really interested. They stop. Initially, there's magazines that are published specifically to give updates on the pandemic and how many deaths are taking place, and what's going on. And initially there's queues outside the shops that start printing these magazines, and then afterwards, after a while, after several months, people don't care anymore. They just try to go about their lives as normal. Then obviously there's the element in his book where he speaks about how people try to support each other. There is this where people sing songs, and there are displays, public displays, etc. Again, capturing that human spirit where human beings are just trying to make the best of the situation. And it's very, when you compare it to what's been going on during this COVID-19 outbreak, the way he covers it in the book, it's almost like he's writing about COVID, right? What's happened over the past several months, the past year. And then what's really interesting, what I really want to speak about is this dynamic, or one of the things I want to mention is this dynamic between the doctor, which is representing him in the book, and the priest. And there's this dynamic between these two characters that takes place. Now, before I get into this, something I want to quickly mention is that Camus was right in so many ways, especially when you remove God and you hold the view that there is no God, there is no creator. When you hold such a view, then he's right, that life has no meaning, right? Life has absolutely no meaning. It's all meaningless, it's all pointless. It's just nothing has meaning, including suffering. Suffering itself has no meaning as well. And then obviously the human being is left in this position of the absurd, where it's our nature to seek out meaning. We can't help it. We're goal-driven creatures. There's a very interesting book by a professor named Maxwell. It's considered the best self-help book that's ever been written. It's called Psycho-Cybernetics. Very interesting book. And where the professor, what he does in the book is he also highlights is that us human beings, we are goal-driven machines. That's how we're created. We set goals and we seek to achieve goals. We're looking for meaning. We're looking for purpose. We're driven by this. And Camus acknowledges this, that, as human beings, we cannot escape seeking meaning and purpose. But at the same time, the absurdity is that in the absence of God, life has no meaning. Life has no purpose. And that's the reality. And he acknowledges this. He was intelligent. He understood that if you deny God, and which he did, which he was an atheist, well, then that means that life has absolutely no intrinsic meaning. It has no absolute meaning. There is no purpose. And even in this book, The Plague, he grapples with this idea, in particular from the perspective of suffering. Not just meaning generally speaking, but suffering. What meaning does suffering have? Because suffering, trials, tribulations, hardships, what we go through, every single human being experiences, this aspect of life is very difficult. And it becomes especially so when you deny God, and therefore you face the prospect that life, including suffering, has no meaning. Then why should we suffer? Why go through it? Why continue to live and go through suffering? And that's the integral theme that he plays with, an idea that he plays with in this book. And then obviously the play, like I said, the play between the priest character and the character of the doctor, which is representing Camus himself. Initially, during the outbreak in the book, the priest, in his sermons, in his congregation, he says, well, this is punishment, right? We're being punished. Obviously, the doctor character here doesn't, take well to this, and he sort of said, well, obviously the whole dynamic between a God being a loving God, especially according to us Christianity, perceives God as a loving being. Well, why would he make you suffer? Why would he punish you to such a degree? And now if we obviously taking another perspective on this, if you look at it from the perspective of Christian theology, according to them, Jesus was sent to die for the sins of humanity, right? So if you consider that too now, well, what does it mean to suffer, even from a Christian perspective? Why be punished? Why go through a punishment when your sins have been forgiven? So that's an element of something we need to think about. And then later on in the book, the priest then goes on to take a slightly different angle in another sermon later on, where he presents to his congregation and he says to them that, look, well, you have to just accept this. And it's about submitting, and just accepting it, even if you don't understand it, and fully accepting what's going on, not partially accepting it. Although, and it's interesting because he makes this sermon after the death of a child. Now, children are obviously dying during this plague, and he witnesses this, the death, the child suffering and passing. And Camus really sort of, he's a brilliant writer, so he really brings this to the forefront. Now he gives you this scenario where you're talking about God. How can you even entertain the idea of a loving God when this child is suffering and he's dying? And this is, and I'm going to give you some thoughts from the Islamic perspective near the end of this video. But he brings this out, and he really sort of, for lack of better words, milks this thing. And obviously, this is anyone that has kids, I mean, it will pull at your heartstrings when you really think about such a scenario, that a child passing away or dying and suffering. How does that make sense? And the priest in his sermon, he sort of highlights that this, as much as we we don't like it, he says you just have to accept it. This is the will of God, and you have to accept this. And again, the doctor figure in the book, Camus, who represents Camus himself, he just points out, well, how does this work? How can we accept this? It doesn't make any sense. And at the same time, it's very interesting, and it's very the different perspectives he brings in. On one end, he's subtly doing away with the concept of God, a loving God. And on the other end, at the very same time, he's sticking to his guns, and he's saying, well, there is no meaning in the absence of God. It's all pointless and meaningless anyway. And it seems like the best he can do in the book is, to just say that we have to, in such situations, we just have to be decent. Like when he's inquired about why he's doing what he's doing as a doctor, trying to save lives and help people, well, it's just about being decent. That's it. And what that means, we don't know. What does that mean in and of itself? What's the meaning of being? Why be decent if life and everything in life and about life is meaningless? What does it mean to be decent? But that seems to be his only conclusion. And I guess to summarize from his perspective, all you can do is you have to face life. You have to be decent as a human being. You're going to go through trials and tribulations and hardships and suffering, which is something we can all agree upon, which is inevitable, right? And at the end of the day, it's just you have to go through it. And that, again, he sort of, through the whole book, I guess one of the things that's summarized or comes across, again, is his philosophy of the absurd, which is life has no meaning, suffering has no meaning, it's all pointless, it's all meaningless, yet we continue to seek meaning. We continue to live seeking meaning because just who we are as human beings, and we can't escape this. And it's a strange type of existence that, on one end, life is meaningless, yet we as human beings seek meaning, but we can't find meaning, but we keep going. And that seems to be his conclusion, and the conclusion of his outlook. Now, obviously, other existentialist philosophers took different perspectives on how to make sense of, or how to give ourselves meaning, how to sort of plug that gap, that hole. And they recognize, and the existentialist philosophers, I really respect them from the perspective that many of them were atheists. However, they weren't lying to themselves and they weren't deluding themselves, right? They were honest. They didn't waste time making things up just to get by, right? They acknowledged, okay, there is no, if they were the atheist type and they said there is no God, well, then they immediately acknowledged and recognized, well, there is no meaning to life. There is no purpose to life. It's all pointless. There's no meaning to suffering. But what they did, instead, they spent time on trying to provide meaning, trying to give something of substance to humanity to get by and to continue to live. Camus had his own approaches and own perspectives. The other philosophers, Nietzsche had his own perspective. Jean-Paul Sartre had his own perspective, and they all had their own ways of dealing with this and providing an alternative. Jordan Peterson, I'm sure most of you guys have heard of him, have followed some of his stuff, and some of his stuff is brilliant. It's really, really good. But again, what Jordan Peterson is doing, especially when you read the existentialist philosophers, one of the things you realize he's doing is he sees that we as humanity find themselves in the very same position as they did in the early 19th century, in the 20th century, in the 18th century, in the 18th century, and 17th century, when you deny God and you move away from God. Initially, obviously, from a European perspective, you had Christianity, which dominated the world for a very long time. Now, obviously, this came with some of its problems, but at the same time, at least they gave humanity the foundations, the existential framework to be able to make sense of life, right? Because they grounded things in God. But when you remove God, well, then you open up this huge black hole now, which cannot be plugged. And this is why you had the existentialist movement, which really took off, especially post World War II, because the world wars, what they did was they reminded humanity of the very real aspect of life, which is suffering. Especially the world wars highlight this to us, that how suffering is a reality. Sure, there's the type of suffering that takes place, which is natural, if you like, from natural disasters, etc. But then there's the type of suffering which human beings cause as well, and life is full of suffering. So now imagine the scenario. On one end, you have a world which is moving towards godlessness, right? Which means that all those existential framework and foundations are being removed from humanity. On the other end, we're seeing suffering like never before, especially because of the world wars and all the wars that were taking place, and they can't make sense of life. And this is really people are breaking down. So the existentialists try to provide something to ground humanity in the absence of God, in the absence of teleology, meaning, or purpose. So Camus does this as well, but when you read these individuals, you would see that they whatever they can provide in the absence of God just doesn't work. When you really scrutinize it and you break it down, at the end of the day, it just doesn't work. And like going back to Jordan Peterson, one of the things he's trying to do, and I think he's really popular, and which is I think it's a good thing, because look, people, they don't have many choices these days, guys. If we really think about it, you either have atheism, the type of atheism that's been promoted by Richard Dawkins, which is a naturalistic type of atheism, which, if you follow through with it, you realize, well, life is absolutely meaningless. Now, following such a view and outlook works for a while, right? It may work for a while, but eventually you realize that life is, you can't deal with it. Your nature, your very nature as a human being, it's in stark contrast to naturalism and atheism. It will leave you in a state of dissonance, continuous struggle, internal struggle. You will feel anxiety. It'll give you an existential crisis, literally. And people have been going through this. So when Jordan Peterson comes and he gives you a different perspective to naturalism and atheism, but at the same time he's not pushing for this type of traditional religion, it's a breath of fresh air for people of today. So, and I guess it's a stepping stone for people back to what we would consider is the truth, which is, look, at the end of the day, and I know it's hard for people to appreciate that, not only that God exists, but that God created you for a specific purpose, which is to recognize Him and to worship Him and to submit to Him and to live according to what God has told us to do, because God knows best and we don't. This is a difficult pill for people to swallow, especially a people that are born into a post-enlightenment world where, where they're sold this idea of freedom, a false idea of freedom and independence, a false notion of independence, and even to the degree where people are led to believe that they are a type of deity in and of themselves, that they control their destiny, that they don't. That this type of mentality this is why it's difficult for people to acknowledge Islam and the truth of Islam, because people are brainwashed into thinking that they themselves are God. Now imagine taking such a person and telling them that they have to submit to God and they were created to worship God, when they have been busy all of their lives worshipping themselves and materialism, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's a gradual process, and this is why for the Muslims, sometimes we find it difficult in our dawah, because we're not considering these things. We're not realizing that we're speaking to a people who are very, very far away from the correct understanding of what life is and who they are. And on top of this, obviously, we have the added element of the misinformation and the distortions that are being spread about Islam in the world today. And obviously, some of that I believe is deliberate, because, people don't want people to wake up. But to top that up, when you add this on top of the whole thing, now obviously you can see how difficult it is for people to understand and appreciate the truth of Islam. But all we can do is try to share the message. And one thing I want to highlight and end on today is going back now. Obviously, went off on a bit of a tangent, but going back to this whole idea of meaning behind suffering. I believe, and the Islamic tradition obviously highlights this and clarifies this and articulates this and has done over the centuries in beautiful ways, is that Islam provides answers to every aspect of life, every question the human has. Also, it includes suffering, how we make sense of suffering. What does suffering mean? Why do we suffer? Whereas obviously something we can appreciate, atheism obviously has no answers because it completely strips you from all types of meaning and value. And on top of it, the existentialists couldn't provide any solid answers either because, again, they could, it was only superficial whatever they could provide. How does Islam solve the problem of suffering? Well, to start off with, it gives us the right framework to understand reality, right? Meaning that, look, God has never promised, throughout the Quran, He never promises that life is supposed to be perfect. Life is supposed to be your paradise. This world is supposed to be paradise. This is not what God promises. Nowhere. But we have assumed this as human beings. We have assumed that life is supposed to be perfect. We have assumed that this is supposed to be paradise. Now, if we really stop, and I want people to do this, really stop and think about where you got this idea from, right? Who told you this? And you'll be hard pressed to find answers. You won't be able to figure out why you've ended up or come to the belief that life is supposed to be paradise. Well, so that's one thing. But I think some of it has to do with just the world that we're born into. Because remember, one of the vision that the Enlightenment philosophers sold in the 18th century was a vision of a worldly utopia, a worldly paradise. That was the goal. Because remember what I said earlier, we are goal-driven machines as human beings. So they had to sell humanity a new goal, a new vision. And that was the vision. This is your paradise. You have to make this the perfect paradise. You have to make this the perfect world. So I think that's one of the reasons we have ended up believing that this world is supposed to be perfect. Right? And then when you start with that assumption, when you start with that foundational assumption, when you suffer and you go through hardships and trials, it's going to all fall apart. And when you try to figure out answers, and when you look at the question of God, and you think about the question of God from the perspective of the lens of suffering, from that foundational perspective, it's not going to make sense. You're going to end up blaming God. Oh, God is evil. God is bad. He's making me suffer. Well, that's gonna be the case for you because you started off with the wrong assumption that life is supposed to be perfect, right? Now, another problem is, or what's going to add to this is if you have a Christian conception of God, because according to the Christian conception of God, God is love. That's it, pretty much, So, and on top of it, when you take the whole the theological understanding of Jesus dying for the sins of humanity and you being forgiven through the blood of Jesus, etc. Well, that's going to add to your problems because you're really not going to be able to make sense of suffering anymore, right? So I don't blame people when they end up blaming God for the hardships and trials and tribulations because they start off with the wrong foundations, the wrong assumptions. Now, what does God say? What does God say in the Quran, in His final revelation? God tells us very, very clearly, what is this life? God says He created death and life to test which of us is best in action, in deeds. Right? In another place, God says that He created us, the jinn kind and mankind, for no other reason except to worship Him. Worship Him, know Him, and worship Him. Worship is comprehensive in Islam. Just for now, it suffices to understand that worship doesn't just mean praying all day long or carrying out the ritualistic acts. Worship is comprehensive. Your entire life, your actions, the good you do is your worship. And this is why when we see these two truths from the Quran, one aspect being that God created us to know Him and worship Him, and the other aspect being that God, Allah, created us to test which of us is best in deeds, they come together in a very profound and beautiful way because there's two ways I've thought about this, and this is my reflections on this. Number one is, the first call of, or the point of, the first good action that we can do, or the first integral action we need to take as human beings, is to recognize our Creator and to worship Him, because that's what we were created for. That's our purpose. right? And then when we act, and we have to act as human beings, this is what life is all about. Life is a set of choices and actions. And when we act, and if we act in with awareness of our Creator, consciousness of our Creator, then that is our worship. And this is how we understand worship in Islam. Everything is worship, can be worship, if we are conscious of God and we do it for the right reasons. And therefore our actions have to be in line with this belief and acknowledgement too. We have to act in the right way, do good, establish good, etc. So going back to the point, life is a test. We're in an examination room right now. We're not in paradise. And when you're in an examination room, go back to the time when you ever sat your exams, your GCSEs or whatever exams you may have sat. When you're in an examination room, it's not comfortable. It's not easy. You're not relaxed. You know, you're looking at the clock. You realize time is running out. You have a bit of you're breaking out into a bit of a sweat. You have an examination paper in front of you. You know, and you can't just sit there and do nothing. You have to go through the paper. Time's running out. You have to go through each paper, each question, and you have to think, and you have to make the effort to write down the right answers, to tick the right answers, right? It's tough, it's not easy. But what's happened here in our lives is we have completely forgotten this reality, and we've somehow been convinced that life is paradise. And therefore we're sitting in the examination room, but we're completely heedless of the fact that we're sitting in an exam. We're just sitting back and chilling, you know, and we're not realizing time's running out. And it's unfortunate that many of us are going to wake up when the bell rings and the time is over, and you see, then you're shaken out of your sort of delirium and delusion, and you realize, oh, people are leaving. Well, there was an exam going on. And then you're carried out of the examination room, not given a moment more to finish those or answer those questions. It's unfortunate that most of us are going to end up in that situation. And this is why God sent revelation. It's guidance for us. He doesn't need any. We're not going to benefit Him by worshipping Him or reading His revelation. You know, this is why the Prophet said, and this is something very interesting for the thinking person. Really think about this. Even in the Quran, God makes mention, when the prophets came to their people, one of the things that they repeated over and over again, even the Prophet, peace be upon him, mentioned this in his own words. We want nothing off you. We want nothing from you. This is a reminder. We don't want money from you. We don't want power from you. We don't want anything from you. This is a reminder for you. And that in itself, if you really sit and think about this, highlights that these people, from a psychological perspective, they had nothing to gain from a worldly perspective. They were simply delivering a message given to them, and that they had to give to the people. That's it. And in God's final message, in the Quran, He highlights very clearly life is a test. So you're going to go through hardships and trials and tribulations. You're going to be tested. You're going to be put in situations where you're going to have to choose to do the right thing. You're going to have to make choices. And you've been given the free will to do this. And you've also been given an internal compass, what we refer to as the fitrah, the nature, which recognizes as a basic understanding of the differentiation between right and wrong. Right? And you're going to be put through you're going to suffer sometimes. And when you put in a situation, a trial, that's for you and it's for your benefit. Because if you make the right choices and you go through this life in the right way, you're going to have eternal paradise. The real paradise is to come in the next life. It's not in this life. It's to come in the next life. This is why people like Marx, for example, had a big issue with religion. Huge issue with religion. Because these were people that were fixated on this material world. And they wanted people to fixate on this material world. He had an issue with religion and he referred to religion as the opium of the masses. Why? Because the philosophies and ideologies they wanted to push, these worldly philosophies and ideologies they wanted to push, religion opposed them just through certain concepts and ideas. For example, he observed that religion made people comfortable, even through difficulties and hardships. And he didn't want people to be comfortable in hardships and trials and tribulations. He realized people when they were, when they weren't doing too well socially or economically, when they were suffering from these perspectives and going through hardships, he realized people found solace in religion. Their hearts found comfort in turning to God. He didn't want this because this meant it removed the the desire he wanted to create within people to attain a better life from a worldly perspective, right? So you can see why they had, how religion really, is in opposition to certain worldly ideologies and philosophies people want to push and have wanted to push throughout history. So that's the first thing. Again, I went off on a tangent, but coming back to the point. Number one, God makes clear that life is a test. Therefore, you're going to go through hardships, trials, and tribulations, and it's going to be, seeing how you deal with these trials and tribulations. And when we go through this life, the other thing we need to understand, this life is a springboard for the hereafter. How we act, what we do, what we make of this life determines where we end up in the hereafter. The third thing I want to quickly mention and outline or highlight is that, sure, this life, you may go through some things which may be a form of punishment. But from the Islamic perspective, this is a removal of sins. This is a means of purification, right? And you would want to go through this purification because you don't want to deal with purification in the hereafter, right? So you rather go through it in this life. Here's another perspective, and again, this is something that may resonate more with people of today, the non-Muslim, which is growth, development, to really come to terms with your God-given potential and faculties. I mean, the type of growth you get, guys, if you really think about it, the type of growth you get. Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way: if you never went through hardships and trials in life, if you never experienced anything hard, and if your whole life was just comfort and luxury, you would never grow. You would never grow. It just won't happen. We grow through the most difficult and darkest times of our life. That's when we grow. As painful as those times are, as difficult as those times are, as much as those times break us, if they don't kill you, you're going to come out stronger. You're going to come out stronger. You're going to grow. You're going to develop. You're going to find, or you're going to see aspects of your own existence and yourself, and you're going to discover things about yourself that you never knew that were within you. You're going to develop as a human being. It's like, imagine you're at the bottom of a rock face. You're in a ditch, and you have a steep climb. You're looking up at a rock face in this huge mountain in front of you, and there's only one way out, to climb out. There's two things you could do in that moment. You can sit at the bottom of that cliff and cry and complain and moan. You're not going to move if you do this. You're just going to depress yourself and frustrate yourself and just get agitated. You can complain all you like, you're not going to get out. Or you can make the decision to start climbing. And as you climb, and if you make that decision to climb, as you climb up, each time you move up an inch, a meter, you're going to realize that you have certain strengths. You're going to realize you have certain abilities. You're going to realize that you could do things you never thought you could do before. And as you climb higher and higher, you're going to build certain muscles, right? As you pull yourself up that cliff face, you're going to build certain muscles, and you're going to get stronger. And when you get to the top, when you eventually get to the top, you're going to be a person that you're going to be a brand new person. You're going to be a type of person that's not only going to be of benefit to yourself going forward, you're going to be able to benefit other human beings. And look, history is testament to this. Those that, look, ask yourself the question, who are the ones, most psychologists, counselors, are individuals who have suffered themselves in the past. Alcoholics Anonymous is run by, and I believe it was started by an ex-alcoholic. People that have suffered and gone through hardships, they become people that not only are beneficial for themselves, but can benefit humanity. Suffering develops you. Hardships develop you. It's painful, but it's for us. It's for our benefit. Another beautiful benefit, and if this was the only benefit that was there within suffering, which is not the case, but if this was the only benefit in suffering, this would be sufficient. In many cases, as human beings, we turn to our Creator. We wake up to reality when we suffer. Otherwise, we're deluded. We're distracted. We're sleeping. The comforts of life make you arrogant and delusional. This is just human psychology. God mentions this in the story of the two gardeners. I put up a video a few days ago. Please check that out if you haven't watched it already. The story of the two gardeners, where one of the gardeners in the Quran, he's very, very wealthy. He has a lot of money, and his money and wealth completely delude him. Completely delude him. He walks into his garden one day, he looks around, he's like, you know what? I don't think the day of judgment is ever going to come. I don't think this is going to go anywhere. And even if it was to come, God's going to give me something far better in the hereafter than He's given me in this life. Can you see the level of delusion this man has reached? And this is an archetype for us, honestly, a profound universal truth which is captured within this narrative, which is true of all of us. I mean, we've all experienced this. Ask yourself when life was good and comfortable and you had everything, how far away were you from God? How far away were you from the reality of life? How distracted were you? And ask yourself the opposite question. When you were going through a difficult time and hardship, a trial, when you felt broken, your ego was broken, your arrogance was broken, didn't you turn to God at that time? And I'll guarantee any atheists that are watching this, I'm sure you have been, or you may very well go through this at some point in your life, where when you're broken and you're really broken, when life really hits you in the face and you feel completely hopeless, look inside you and see how your heart turns towards God. And it probably has already. And how you call out to God and how you ask God for help. And how at that moment the reality of God is beyond a shadow of a doubt. You know He's the only one that can help you. The question of His existence, does God exist or not, is something so far from you that you just can't, you're not bothered about that. These are questions that are entertained by those that have the luxury and the comforts to entertain them, that are spoiled from that they're so comfortable in life that they have nothing better to do than to entertain things which are just pointless, that are not true. So suffering gives us an opportunity to turn back to God and to connect with God, our Creator. And if that's the only thing that happens, that we gain through suffering, well, if suffering leads us to fulfilling the purpose of our life, then, well, how beautiful is that suffering? How priceless is that suffering? I mean, if we really think about it. So, I mean, look, I guess I'll end on this. So look, what I'm getting at is this, is that suffering is a reality we can't escape. Suffering, we're going to all face it, right? We all do face it. We go through it. But what I'm trying to get at here is this, is that Islam provides a comprehensive account of suffering and life. It provides a comprehensive account of what life means, who you are as a human being, why we're here, and what even suffering means, why we suffer, why we go through hardships and trials and tribulations. It's a profound thing. And look, let me give you a positive here as well. There is a beautiful thing that God captures or mentions in the Quran for us. If you want a good life, right? A life that doesn't have that much suffering and trials and tribulations, a life that has tranquility. If you want peace, tranquility, you know how that's only going to be found through God. For example, there's a beautiful verse in the Quran. I made a note of it that I want to share with you. It's in the 16th chapter of the Quran. I encourage everyone to go read it and to just look into this ayah of the Quran, this verse of the Quran. 16th chapter, verse 97. God says, "Whoever does good," right? Whoever does good. And I'm paraphrasing it. This is not the exact translation, but I'm giving you the meaning. Whoever does good, male or female, whilst they are a believer, they acknowledge their Creator, they will have a good life. Hayatan tayyiban, I think that's the Arabic. They would have a good life. God will give them a good life, right? Now this here, God lets us in on a bit of, a piece of knowledge here, which is very profound, that look, sure, life is suffering and we're going to go through trials and tribulations, but if you want to minimize those and have a good life, the only way to do that is to acknowledge your Creator. And I thought about this for a while. And there's another beautiful verse, a passage in another part of the Quran, Surah Ankabut, I think it is. I don't remember exactly what chapter it is, but where God in the very beginning, He highlights that just because you believe, do you think that you're not going to be tested anymore? You're going to go through trials and tribulations. And God highlights that these tests are there for you, that these tests happen. One of the reasons that God tests us is to see which of us are truthful and which of us are liars, right? So what is this truth that's being tested? Do we actually acknowledge our Creator and submit to Him, right? Do we actually do this? And the way our belief is tested is actually obviously when we go through hardships and trials. And once this is established and we truly believe and acknowledge our Creator, well then some of those trials and tribulations obviously are going to be lifted. And as God says in this verse, that we will have a good life. So a way to have a good life, the formula to have a good life is to acknowledge your God and submit to Him and to worship Him truly and to fulfill the purpose of your life. And as you do this, some of the trials and tribulations at least will be alleviated. And even if they're not, think about it from this perspective. Islam not only highlights for us, and I'll end on this. I know we're getting to 40 minutes. Islam not only makes sense of meaning, makes sense of suffering and contextualizes suffering for us. Islam not only contextualizes this for us, it provides us with tools that we need to be able to deal with suffering. Now, some of the tools God highlights and outlines is patience. Patience is almost a forgotten virtue that human beings have. Patience, especially in the world that we live in today. I mean, we practice anything but patience. We live in a world of instant gratification. Everything is on tap. We get it immediately. And if anything is delayed by 5 minutes, we just freak out. We just get angry and agitated. Where patience is one of the virtues God has outlined in the Quran over and over again. And in one of the chapters of the Quran, Surah Al-Asr, God says, where God says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. That God says, by the passage of time, mankind is in absolute loss, except for those who do these 4 things, who have these 4 traits, who believe, do good deeds, who advise to the truth and advise to patience. Patience is a virtue which is being outlined as a virtue that's necessary for us to be successful in this life. And it's a virtue that we have to inculcate within us and develop within us if we are to deal with and overcome the trials and tribulations of this life. Patience is a tool that God has given every human being that we need to practice. And along with patience, another tool, for example, just one more tool I'll outline for us here, is tawakkul, which means trust in God, reliance upon God. If we can practice reliance upon God, and I'm speaking to myself right now as well, if we can practice reliance upon God alongside patience, be patient, these 2 things alone are so powerful in overcoming hardships and trials of life. And to get through the hardships and trials of life and to not break down. These are so necessary. If we can only practice these 2, trust in God and patience. What these will allow us to do is they will allow us to navigate the trials and tribulations of life and come out on the other end, on the other side. And not only come out on the other side, but they'll allow us to maximize the benefit of the trials and tribulations. Because look, let's put it this way. Once I heard I think it was in a Jummah khutbah. The Imam once said a profound thing which has stuck with me since then. He said, every trial and tribulation, every hardship in life has a scholarship that can be gained from it, right? There's a scholarship to be gained from every hardship and trial of life. But to gain that scholarship, you have to be in the right state of mind. You have to be calm and cool and collected to be able to attain that lesson in that trial and tribulation. And most of the times we miss these opportunities because we're frustrated, we're angry, we're agitated, we're anxious, we're breaking down. We can't make sense of things, we're complaining. But if we can only grab ourselves and hold ourselves in those moments and really just take hold of ourselves and say, you know what, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to put my trust in Allah and God because I know whatever I'm going through for a reason. I'm going through for a reason and God is in control. He's taking care of me and there is something good in this that I need to gain from this. I'm going to put my trust in God and I'm going to be patient. And when you put yourself in that state of mind, then those lessons and those gems that are held within those trials and tribulations, no matter how difficult those things may be, they'll start to open up to us. They'll start to open up to us. Not only will we grow through trials and tribulations, but we will gain lessons, priceless lessons which will help us later in our lives and help others, that we can share with others, right? So, I mean, Islam, hopefully we can, I know I haven't done justice to this, but hopefully we can start to appreciate how Islam, provides not only a comprehensive account to suffering and the meaning behind suffering, but gives us tools to be able to deal with suffering and to go through the suffering and to come out as stronger people and to make the most of this life not only understand this life, but to make the most of this life so we can attain a beautiful place in the hereafter. Now, if this isn't mercy from God, if this isn't a mercy from our Creator who's completely free of need, then I don't know what is, right? But, and especially what we're going through during this COVID-19, I know there's loads of people out there. I've heard of stories myself where people have been put into a situation now because of lockdown. It's been over a year, man. I mean, if we think about it, people have been forced into a position now where they're having to just question life, and to ask the deeper questions about life. What is life all about? What does this mean? Why am I here? What's the purpose of my existence? Why am I suffering? What does suffering mean? And they're asking these questions, and there's a window that's opened up for them. And if anyone is in that state right now, in that position right now, that's watching this, I really recommend you guys. This is all I can do, right? I can't convince anyone. I can't force anyone. Just pick up a copy of the Quran. Read it for yourselves and see if it answers these questions, these existential questions that you have about life, about existence. See if it answers these questions for you. See what it says to you. And for me personally, I'm at that place now where for me, the truth of Islam it doesn't lie in a logical deduction, a logical argument. The proof of Islam lies in its utility. I mean, an Arab in a desert being given a revelation supposedly over 1400 years ago, which provides answers to and accounts for and addresses the deepest human questions, that we've been asking and engaging with for since man first stepped foot on this earth, and even today, it provides answers to these things. That is a profound proof, for anyone that takes the time to think about it. And I really encourage you guys to pick up the Quran and read it if you haven't already, and see what it says to you. And yeah, I just leave you with this. I mean, the choice is yours. You can either you have to go one way or the other. Atheism is not the solution. Most people are waking up to this reality and realizing this. Either you can go one of two ways. You can go down the route of the existentialist philosophers and try to do with what they've provided as far as temporary solutions. Or you can go and search for the ultimate truth, which is not a temporary solution, but an absolute solution to life and what we go through in life. The choice is yours. I mean, this is what I'm going to leave you guys with today. So I know I haven't been able to do questions Q&A in this. We're at 47 minutes. The intention wasn't, I was going to do this as a recorded video initially, but then I thought, it's going to be, I'd rather just go live and just put it out there. So I wanted to leave you guys with this. Let me know your thoughts in the question section. Please post your questions in the question section below the video, and I will go through the questions and I'll try to answer all of them to the best of my ability. So I hope this was beneficial. Until next time, take care. Assalamu alaikum.